Hi guys, in this video I'm going to give you 7 proven steps that will help you overcome anxiety for good. These are steps that I use to overcome my anxiety and you can use them too. So stick around to the end because all of these fit together into a coherent system that you can start implementing immediately after watching this video and start getting relief from your anxiety right away. So if you haven't seen me or my channel before, my name's Ed Barton and I struggled with anxiety for as long as I can remember. And throughout my years, I developed OCD, pure O, intrusive thoughts, health anxiety, where I developed an obsession that I had something stuck in my throat. I developed behavioral tics, mental tics, social anxiety, you name it basically. I had psychosomatic illnesses that were related to my anxiety. I would get a kind of mystery flu, and this carried on all through my life until I got to the age of 32 and I devised my own way of getting out of it, because what I found online and with GPs and healthcare professionals, psychiatrists and therapists was not helping me. So I had to find my own way out of the situation. My interest in the mind and overcoming anxiety also led me to become a Buddhist monk in Japan, and I use everything from my personal anxiety journey and my experience of being a monk in Japan to help my clients overcome anxiety permanently. The first step in overcoming your anxiety for good is understanding the problem. And I'm still gobsmacked by the videos that I see on YouTube, the advice that I see from mental health professionals, and just the misinformation around anxiety that I see out there generally. People do not seem to fully understand it. They talk about symptoms, they talk about the amygdala, they talk about an overreactive nervous system. Yes, this is all true, but there is almost always a much deeper root cause in the subconscious mind. I myself was the heir to a long legacy of intergenerational trauma which caused my anxiety. It caused my mother's anxiety, it caused my brother's anxiety, and it affected my cousins and other family members as well, because this was intergenerational trauma passed down through the family lineage. Anxiety itself is like a fire alarm. The amygdala is firing, the nervous system is overactive, there is norepinephrine, there is cortisol, all of these things are firing, yes, but this is the surface level. This is your body telling you something is wrong. But people run around treating the symptoms and not the root cause. They look for supplements, they look for hypnotherapy, acupuncture, massage, ayahuasca, whatever it may be. And I know because I did all of those things. I flew to Peru, I spent thousands of dollars on ayahuasca and doing these retreats in the Amazon jungle. I spent tens of thousands of dollars and decades on therapy, which never got to the root problem. I did everything you could possibly imagine. I took every supplement under the sun. I spent hundreds of dollars on Amazon, but that is not the issue. The root cause of anxiety, in my professional and personal experience, and this goes across 7 years of treating hundreds of people around the world, more than anything, anxiety comes from a deep sense of insecurity within yourself, and it creates a panic which activates the nervous system. As a child, you were most likely not given the sense of assurance and safety that a child should be given. So we grow up with this nondescript feeling of panic, and this neurotic mind fixates on anything, and it creates a variety of anxieties, and often many anxieties within the same person, such as myself. I had health anxiety. I was obsessed with moles on my skin, whether they were going to become cancerous. I obsessed about whether I was getting a brain tumor. I obsessed that I had something growing in my throat. But alongside that, I also had social anxiety. I had signs of generalized anxiety. I had OCD. So these all fit together into a bigger nexus of problems. But the root cause is this frightened, panicked inner child who was never held properly or given a sense of security. Because people who have a deep sense of self-efficacy and self-assurance do not navigate through the world with this constant focus on external situations, this hypervigilance and this neurotic panic about everything. So you really need to understand the problem. If you're still running around and following people on YouTube who are talking about getting control of your symptoms and this and that and the other, it's not going deep enough. You're still barking up the wrong tree. You have to understand that it's something deep within your subconscious mind, within yourself, and most likely this sense of lack, this sense of insecurity, no self-assurance, often low self-esteem. And it usually manifests in people who have a high degree of neuroticism. They're often obsessive about perfectionism. They have an obsessive tendency towards many things. This was true for me. I was OCD. I was OCD about my schoolwork. I was obsessed with always being the best, and it applies to many different areas. So within your life as well, it's quite unlikely that you're going to have a very rational, balanced approach to doing things. You do things in a measured, sensible way, but then you have this anxiety. It's much more likely that you're very high on the neuroticism scale. You may more likely be introverted. You have a high degree of conscientiousness. So you're running around trying to do everything perfect, trying to be the perfect person. And then this mindset also feeds your anxiety. The second step I highly recommend is understanding yourself. And this applies to some of the things I've just touched upon there. Anxiety is often related to personality traits. If you're very high on the neuroticism scale, very introverted, very high in conscientiousness, you're much more likely to develop anxiety. So I really recommend doing the 16personalities.com personality test if you haven't done it before. I'm not affiliated to that, it's just a very good test. It will give you a better understanding of who you are. There are other tests you can do to also understand your personality type and your physical type and how that relates to anxiety. I found even the Indian Ayurvedic system quite insightful with relation to understanding my anxiety. I'm a Vata Pitta type, which means I'm more air-based and fire, which shows up in my skin type, my metabolism, my build, the fact that I'm active. And I've found through coaching many people from many different countries, anxiety usually shows up in people who are lighter build, they have a faster metabolism, they think a lot. Therefore, it's very easy for the mind to get fixated on things, blow things out of proportion, become neurotic, obsessive, and then to develop anxiety. Under this umbrella of understanding yourself, it can also be helpful to track your health metrics, but you have to be careful with this because if you're prone to health anxiety or you're in a state of very obsessive thinking, a health tracker will only feed your anxiety. And it's very easy to obsess over our numbers, obsess over our sleep hours, obsess over our heart rate variability and so on. But if you're at a point where anxiety is not so intense and you're not obsessing over so many things, a health tracker can be very helpful because, as you know, a lot of anxiety lives in the body. It can be measured with physiological responses. So it can be very helpful to track your resting heart rate, your heart rate variability, your sleep numbers, and these kind of things. But as I say, you don't really want to get into this if you know right now that you're very prone to a high degree of obsessive fixation, because you will turn this into another source of panic and anxiety. The third step to overcome anxiety is to reset your central nervous system. And a lot of this involves working with the body. So this is a really crucial foundation step, especially in today's modern society, where most people are stuck in a sympathetic nervous system overdrive. Because of the nature of modern society with so much stimulation from social media, from blue light, from screens, from artificial synthetic foods which spike our dopamine and blood glucose, all of modern society is basically set up to get us into a very activated dopamine-driven state. So it's very important that we do work to reset the nervous system. And this can include many different things, such as doing cardio exercise, going running, doing breathing exercises, stretching and yoga were a massive part of my anxiety recovery. So there's all these things that we can do when working with the body to reset the nervous system. And I would also recommend at this point doing an elimination diet for your mind and your body. So for myself, I removed all caffeine and stimulants. I tried to get off my phone as much as possible. I got off pornography, all of these things that are very stimulating for the nervous system. So it just allows you to eliminate these things from your mental and physical diet and bring you back down to a more stable baseline and try and get you out of that sympathetic overdrive. In my system for treating anxiety, step number 4 is one of the most important, working with the mind. Because as I've said, other people that I've seen talking about treating anxiety, people on YouTube and other online sources, they're very much stuck at the surface level of treating the symptoms, just trying to get you relief from the symptoms. When, as I say, most of it is driven by the mind, the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, especially things like your cognitive distortions, your whole way of interpreting reality, your whole way of doing things, like I said, related to perfectionism, overly conscientious, hypervigilance. There are lots of warped, distorted and maladaptive ways of thinking which really feed anxiety as well. So at this level of working with the mind, as I've touched upon already, we're talking about working with this overly conscientious mindset, a tendency towards a high degree of neuroticism, often an overemphasis on perfectionism. This is all linked to a tendency to fly into panic. Generally, people who are very uptight and attach too much importance to things I find it very easy to fly into panic. This is related to a lack of self-assurance, a lack of self-confidence, and a lack of self-esteem. Because when you have healthy levels of all of these, you have a sense of self-efficacy, you have self-assurance that you can face any challenges that come your way. You believe you have the wherewithal physically and mentally to navigate life's challenges. And this in itself creates a sense of relaxation within the nervous system. You're not scared of how you're going to drive into town, or whether you're going to find a parking space, or what if they don't have what you need at the shop. These are the kind of things which go on in the mind of anxiety sufferers, because they don't have a deep sense of self-assurance that, okay, if I get lost, I'll find my way into town anyway. If there isn't a parking space, I'll figure something out. If they don't have what I need in the shop, I'll find an alternative arrangement. There's this lack of self-efficacy and self-assurance, and it's often related to all of these things: self-confidence, self-esteem. At this stage, there's also a lot of cognitive biases and cognitive distortions that need to be addressed, which also feed back into the anxiety cycle. Things like discounting the positive. You're always looking at your negative aspects. You're always looking at things that you did wrong. You might have done 10 things brilliantly that day. You do one wrong, you ruminate on that, you panic about that, you beat yourself up. It feeds this neurotic, self-critical, overly obsessive mindset. And closely related to this are maladaptive thinking patterns. These are things that I go into more detail in my coaching program with clients, but there's a whole host of faulty malware that anxiety sufferers usually run, a very skewed way of interpreting reality, which constantly keeps them in a state of panic because they feel inferior, they feel they don't have the skills to cope with reality. It creates this deep worry and insecurity and feeds the whole cycle of panic. And in order to overcome these problems, we work on building a solid core of self-assurance. This tells the subconscious mind that there's nothing to worry about. It deactivates the nervous system. We feel solid and secure in ourselves because we work on building self-love, self-esteem. We do self-parenting to parent this panicked, insecure inner child, which is causing the amygdala to fire up all the time. We work on building the friend within, which means working on your inner narratives and your self-advocacy. If you're driving in town and you get lost, instead of panicking and telling yourself you're an idiot, you'll never find a way out of town and you're going to get fined because the CCTV camera saw you driving the wrong way in the bus lane, and all these things which blow out of proportion and cause a great deal of panic, you have a friend within. You have a sense of self-assurance, which leads to a relaxed and supportive inner narrative. So you tell yourself, okay, I'm driving around a new town. That's completely understandable that I don't know where I'm going. We'll work through this. There's no need to worry. You have yourself as your best ally, and you are like a team of one, and you advocate for yourself, and it stops this panic growing all the time. And we work on building trust and confidence with ourselves. We come to rely on ourselves because we have, through actual practice, we have built this trust in our own self-efficacy and our wherewithal to cope with life's challenges. And when you trust yourself, you don't feel a huge degree of anxiety because you're safe. You're safe in yourself and you trust yourself to deal with situations. And this building of trust is done primarily through exposure exercises and desensitizing the nervous system to the things that you're so scared of. So you have to actually practically apply this. So if, for example, driving in a new town causes you a lot of panic and anxiety, you will gradually expose yourself to that in a safe and systematic way. This allows you to actually have new experiences, which leads to new learning. And because of neuroplasticity, this allows new networks to be wired up in the brain because you're having a new experience in relation to this previously anxiety-inducing stimulus, and you then actually wire up a different pathway in your brain with regards to how you deal with driving. The fifth stage of overcoming anxiety for good is dealing with setbacks, and this is just the nature of the anxiety recovery. It is characterized by a number of setbacks, so do not be panicked or surprised or worried if this happens to you and you feel yourself crashing right back to an earlier point that you were at before. It's completely normal, it's completely natural. It happened to me several times and it's happened to every single client that I've ever coached. So do not be alarmed by this. It's part and parcel of the recovery process. The anxiety recovery journey is non-linear. There are times when we feel that we're soaring very quickly and overcoming a lot of our fears and anxieties, and then we'll go right back down and may stay there for longer than we expected, then rapidly accelerate up to a point beyond where we were before, often 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. and this is nothing to be worried about. It is just the nature of the recovery process. Physical stretching and yoga was an important part of my recovery process and gave me a much greater sense of ease and comfort in my body, and it also lowered a lot of my baseline anxiety. And I like to use this stretching as a metaphor for the anxiety recovery. I think it's very helpful if you have a physical practice which kind of mirrors the internal practice of what's going on when we overcome anxiety. And when you're stretching, you'll find that some days you might be able to get both palms down on the floor, and then a couple days later you'll find you can only just get your fingertips to the floor, and you wonder, why on earth has this happened? And as with stretching, overcoming anxiety is best done by gradually just stretching the edge of your comfort zone. You don't want to rip a muscle and injure yourself by overstretching, and you don't want to understretch and give your body an inadequate stimulus to actually grow. So it's very similar when we're exposing ourselves to fears. We want to find that sweet spot of just the right amount of stretch, slightly uncomfortable, but not enough to injure ourselves. So I think it's a very useful metaphor for the whole journey of overcoming anxiety. The sixth step in permanently overcoming anxiety is maintaining your momentum. As I've said, there's going to be setbacks, but you want to keep your positive momentum going. And there's a very important part of the brain that you need to understand to realize how this all works. There's an area of the brain called the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And this is basically like the willpower muscle. And when we start to expose ourselves to our fears and overcome our anxieties, this area of your brain will grow. And I've spoken to so many clients who've said, why is it that when I stop exposing myself to fears, if I don't expose myself long enough, I go right back to baseline, I feel everything's wasted? Well, that is because, to begin with, you need to grow this area of the brain, the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, because this is your willpower muscle. And whether it's social anxiety, driving anxiety, health anxiety, agoraphobia, whatever it is, by exposing yourself to the things you're scared of, it actually grows this area. And in my own experience, over enough time, these changes actually become trait changes. You don't have to constantly push yourself out of baseline because you develop different traits where facing your fears naturally becomes a part of your behavior. So I believe it changes you on a trait level over enough time, and you don't constantly have to be exposing yourself to fears. It's important to understand this. In the beginning, if you are not exposing yourself, or if you do a bit of exposure and then stop, your anterior mid-cingulate cortex will shrink again. And that's why it feels so difficult to actually go back into whatever situation it was that stresses you so much. So you have to keep exercising this part of the brain to begin with exposure. You have to keep growing it. And as I say, this is not a continual process, because over time, I believe you actually develop this fearlessness on a trait level. And as I've said, you develop this inner strength and inner self-love and self-assurance. So you're not in a constant state of panic, and you don't have to constantly keep testing yourself and exposing yourself. So this is much like a literal muscle in the body. If you don't exercise it, it is going to atrophy, and you build this muscle by exposing yourself. And this is something that I find very strange about sufferers and people who are so-called experts talking about anxiety, and they don't talk about the constant practice of exposure. How on earth can you overcome your anxieties by just sitting in a therapist chair or lying on your sofa, theorizing about it, watching YouTube videos and thinking about it? It's very good to educate yourself, of course, but you have to actually go out and practice it to create these changes in your brain, in the actual pathways and neural structures of your brain. That's how the real change comes. That's how I completely changed who I was, from this fearful, cynical, scared little guy who was housebound and couldn't go outside. I had to pay a psychiatrist at the age of 27 to actually help me to walk around outside because I was housebound. He had to show me how to walk down the street. So I went from that to being where I am now, which is living an expansive and fulfilling life and confident life and happy life, because I changed my brain through repeated exposure challenges. You've got to do this neural rewiring part of the process. And if you've watched the video this far, I'll give you a bonus step, which is moving beyond anxiety, and this helps to permanently eradicate anxiety. And in this part of the process, we're now talking about having moved past this constant state of panic and feeling of lack and worry and anxiety and fear. And we're now able to build a life which actually feeds a more positive internal state and which continues the positive momentum we talked about in the last step, but also bulletproofs you against setbacks, because you're now living at such a higher level that you're generating so much positive emotion internally that it's much less likely to fall down to lower levels of negative internal mind states such as fear, anxiety, worry, pessimism, and all of these things. So this is a very important part of my own process. This is a self-actualization process. And in this part of the puzzle for me, I was now free of living in total fear. I'd come off anti-anxiety medication and I started to look at what else I could do in my life to keep improving. I started reading and researching about happiness, gratitude. This led to me becoming a monk as well. Human flourishing, improving my relationships, improving my finances, finding passion, purpose, and vision for your life, which is what I have now as an anxiety coach, helping people from around the world. So when you are filling up with all this positive emotion, positive energy, it's much harder to slip back down into those negative mind states. And in my life up until the age of 32, when I started my anxiety recovery process, I was dominated by anxiety, fear, depression, rumination, overthinking, low self-esteem, compulsive behaviors, addictions, all of these things, these negative, low energy, low mind states. And when you start filling up your life with this positivity, it's like a light bulb which gets turned up so bright that the shadows of anxiety can't creep in. You burn them off. The anxiety, the depression, all of those negative mind states, they do not have room to crowd in because you are now full of so much positive emotion, so many positive neurotransmitters, so much serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin. You're connecting, you're building your relationships, you're building your finance, you're building a new business, all of these things that go along with the self-actualization process. And this safeguards you against slipping back down, having setbacks. And you're now talking about a complete character change, a real deep-seated neural and physical change in the body and the physiology, the nervous system, where you're a happier, brighter, optimistic person. You don't worry, you don't freak out, you're not panicked, you're not wobbly and scared about every little thing. You have a rock solid sense of self-assurance, you feel calm, collected, and enthusiastic, optimistic, and passionate about life. Those are my proven 7 steps for overcoming anxiety. But if you want more help in overcoming anxiety, check out the videos here and here on my channel.